How is everybody doing? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today, I wanted to talk to everybody a little bit about ESG and DEI. So if I'm being perfectly honest, this is kind of an episode I dreaded covering, but I wanted to cover it just because there's been so much news and so much information in recent weeks about it. It's a very heavy political topic, and I wanted to tread carefully because I myself have some pretty strong personal beliefs about the DEI and ESG. I really do not like this stuff, but like I said, I wanted to cover 3 articles today, and then I want to let you have your thoughts and see what you think. So so we're going to be covering 3 articles here today. We're going to look at an article from CNBC. We're going to look at an article from the Wall Street Journal, which I think is kind of an interesting story about Morgan Stanley and how DEI has affected them. And then we're going to look at an article from the Epoch Times on ESG. And basically, is it going away? Is it not going away? And that's kind of the gist of this CNBC article here as well. So let's take a look at this. So CNBC says basically game over for ESG investing due to Trump backlash, and analysts say no. So the key points here. So ESG funds have suffered outflows for 2 consecutive years, partly due to political blowback. Investment analysts say environmental, social, and governance funds are here to stay despite headwinds. And critics say ESG investing is akin to woke capitalism. Advocates say it delivers better long-term returns for investors. So one of the things to understand is that, people might say, well, ESG and DEI, they're different things. Well, they are different things, but DEI is also included in ESG. It's a part of ESG. It's ingrained in it. Just like, CRT, DEI, ESG, like these things all go together. They're all the same thing. They're all lumped together as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure there are other people out there that may disagree, but I digress for the moment. But let's continue here. So investors have pulled money from so-called ESG funds in recent years amid political backlash, high interest rates, and other headwinds. But analysts say the outlook and long-term investment thesis for the fund category, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, are favorable. President Donald Trump's agenda isn't game over for ESG investing. Demand for ESG investments is here to stay, even in the face of political pressure. So ESG outflows amid anti-ESG backlash. So ESG investing is known by many names, such as social, responsible, sustainable, impact, or values-based investing. Such funds allow people to invest accordingly to certain values like climate change or corporate diversity. Investors yanked almost $20 billion from U.S. ESG mutual and exchange-traded funds in 2024 after withdrawing about $13 billion in 2023, according to Morningstar. By contrast, investors poured $740 billion into the overall universe of mutual funds and ETFs in 2024, Morningstar found. I don't think we really expected something different because of the anti-ESG backlash in the U.S. and the political environment there. Said Hortenson Bio, head of sustainable investing research at Morningstar. Critics call ESG a form of woke capitalism that sacrifices returns for the sake of liberal goals. Advocates argue that ESG investing positions investors for higher long-term returns because companies that adopt such practices are poised to be more resilient and therefore more successful than their peers. And then the article just goes on to say basically outflows follow years of steady growth. And then it says, politics pose headwinds for ESG. And then, non-political headwinds like high interest rates. And then it wraps up by saying, ESG is investing, not philanthropy. And that's kind of the end of the article there. So this is kind of like setting the stage here for us. But let's look at the Epoch Times. So the Epoch Times article here says ESG and DEI are down but not out, analysts say. So some analysts say that support for the progressive ideologies was never deeply rooted among many corporate executives. Yes, I would have a tendency to agree with that. Despite recent eulogies for the environmental, social, and governance (ESG) movement and for diversity, equity, inclusion (DEI) policies, many insiders say the funeral is premature. Their demise is inevitable, and it has been accelerated. David Benson, chief investment officer of the Benson Group and formerly an asset manager at Morgan Stanley, told the Epoch Times. However, they are not over, he said. The ESG movement began 2 decades ago with a UN initiative sketched out in a 2004 position paper called Who Cares Wins, to get private companies in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Those goals included, among other things, climate action and gender and racial equity, and they aligned with corporate trends such as conscious capitalism and stakeholder capitalism, which redirected companies from merely serving their owners to serving employees, the community, and the environment. Institutional asset managers gave the ESG movement critical leverage over companies because they collectively own about 80% of the shares in S&P 500 companies. Immediately upon its introduction, ESG was endorsed by 23 financial institutions, collectively representing more than $6 trillion in assets at the time. Most major banks, asset managers, and insurance companies quickly joined UN-sponsored climate clubs, including the Net Zero Banking Alliance, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, and the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. This was followed by a proliferation of ESG rating agencies, consultants, accountants, and others dedicated to measuring companies' compliance with ESG criteria. 20 years later, the winds appear to have shifted. In 2024, half of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance members quit, while the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative suspended its activities in January after several of its largest members, including BlackRock, left the group. A 2024 Securities and Exchange Commission order that required listed companies to produce audited reports of their CO2 emissions and their plans to reduce them faced numerous court challenges and was recently shelved. And on the social justice front, a parade of companies recently announced that they are downsizing their diversity programs. ESG is on death watch. David Cameron, CEO of the 1792 Exchange and Analysts nonprofit, told the Epoch Times, "You saw a lot of iconic brands last year walk away from DEI in particular. Companies stepping back from diversity programs include Amazon, Google, Target, Meta, Walmart, Boeing, Molson Coors, Lowe's, Ford, Toyota, Harley-Davidson, Jack Daniels, Caterpillar, John Deere, McDonald's, Nissan, Stanley, Black & Decker, and Tractor Supply." So some experts say this trend may be little more than rebranding. Boeing, who just got rid of its DEI department, noted in the press release that none of them were laid off. They were distributed across the company in other roles. And many companies, including Apple, Cisco, Costco, Microsoft, Delta Airlines, and JP Morgan Chase, have defended their DEI programs and insist they will keep them in some form. And then, of course, the famous, now infamous line from BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, formerly an outspoken advocate for ESG, stated in 23 that he no longer uses the term because it has been politicized and weaponized. And he basically said, whether it goes by ESG or another name, its underlying principles appear to be alive and well. So basically, yes. So I think the people here who really are the acolytes of this, who have really adopted this as their almost as a religion in a lot of ways, they're not going to let this go. They're not going to let this go. This is just going to get rebranded under a different name, and a lot of companies that still, that have basically a lot of companies that have rooted this in their culture will continue to carry these things out. You could press back against it, but I think the key thing here is that most corporations, I think the majority of corporations, were not really, they did not really buy into this. They did not really go full bore into this. They did it because they either, a lot of companies are just terrified, absolutely terrified of any negative press, of getting picked on in any way, shape, or form. And so they will just basically go along to get along. If it looks cool, if it looks hip, it looks popular, and especially if they don't want to get blasted by the crazy crowd on social media, they will just go right along with it. And and that, this whole notion of cancel culture plays very big into this. I think a lot of companies got bullied in a very real way. It was like a silent bullying, but it was a bullying into going along with all of this stuff in the first place. And now you see this, like, so basically the minute that it became okay to walk away from this stuff, many companies did, because this stuff, again, in my opinion, it brings no value. It brings zero value. It costs a tremendous amount, but it brings no value to these companies. Show me the statistics. Show me the statistics where this has really made a difference. And this gets back to the whole notion of ESG, this whole cottage industry of companies that basically supported the whole ESG framework. And they try, I know dozens of people that worked at financial institutions across the country who spent years trying to calculate their CO2 and trying to determine what was going on. And at the end of the day, really couldn't come up with anything concrete, and really struggled with coming up with any kind of materialistic, measures, hardcore measures of what was really going on there, and really being able to show that, like, oh yeah, they were making a tremendous difference. Some companies claimed that they did, but then one of the criticisms of the whole ESG investing is the fact that basically a lot of the numbers that they advocated or put out were not correct, or were false, or were, fraudulently put out there. Again, therein lies a big problem with a lot of this stuff. So and the article basically goes on, it says, U.S. splits from Europe. Much of the corporate activism happens behind closed doors, for example, through engagement meetings, such that there is little accountability or transparency. Declining value of alliances here. And then that's pretty much the end of it. I think at the most extreme, I think what I find to be some of the most egregious things is when you hear the stories of basically people who work for companies and were basically forced to sit through all kinds of DEI training. And if they didn't do it, they were basically risking losing their job. It's like, okay, if you don't submit yourself to this, then you're in a big trouble. And that's what we're about to look at right here. So our last article here, basically, this is Morgan Stanley went big on DEI and no one is happy about it. Black and white employees say the efforts added to a divisive culture. Now, as political pressure rises, the bank is watering down initiatives. So across America, corporate diversity initiatives are in the crosshairs of legal activists and a Trump administration set on wiping them out. At Morgan Stanley, the backlash bubbled up from within. So, and then it goes into, after George Floyd's murder, the investment bank CEO basically said, okay, we're gonna get into this. Today, the bank faces discrimination accusations and lawsuits, including several in recent months from both white and black workers, and criticism from staff who say the efforts either fell short or were unduly heavy-handed. Even a high-profile initiative aimed at hiring more black employees came under fire after some discovered they were underpaid compared with their peers. An internal review in early 2023 resulted in the firm increasing the employees' salaries and paying them tens of thousands of dollars in extra bonuses. The workplace tensions at Morgan Stanley have flared as companies scramble to respond to a national reckoning over race relations, and then tried to temper the approach once the legal climate shifted. While outside pressure has been the focus of the growing political and legal war against DEI, employees and executives have also clashed inside offices as business leaders brought on consultants, training sessions, and race-specific hiring targets. Morgan Stanley is now watering down diversity initiatives it put in place, including after 2020. The endeavors had added to a divisive culture in which white and black employees said that there were few winners, despite what bank executives said had been a vigorous and well-intended effort to tackle a complex challenge. And Morgan Stanley spokesman disputed that the bank's policies have created divisiveness or tensions. He pointed to company-wide surveys in which most employees gave the bank high scores on its commitment to diversity and inclusiveness, and said the bank is in a place where they are treated with dignity and respect. With 80,000 employees around the world, there will always be outliers, but the vast majority of our employees of all backgrounds agree that Morgan Stanley is a great place to work. Well, seriously, what else is the spokesman going to say? What is the spokesman going to say? Oh, yeah, we suck. No, that's not happening. In interviews with more than 24 current and former employees and others close to the firm, some Black staffers said they got little support after being recruited through a minority training program launched in 2021. Others said they were poached from competitors, but to lower level roles than they had previously held, or to positions that were eliminated within a year or two. Anthony Fletcher, who runs a Chicago area recruiting firm, contracted in the effort to bring more Black employees on board, recalling asking one of Morgan Stanley's regional diversity officers why so many of his recruits weren't getting bigger jobs. The reply: white financial advisors wouldn't respect them, and it would be problematic for the firm, said Fletcher, who sent a letter to Gorman and the board outlining his concerns, and then sued Morgan Stanley for discrimination and unpaid fees in 2023. See, just what a cluster. What an absolute cluster. McDade, the spokesman, said the bank rejects Fletcher's allegations of racism and his contractual claim, and said Fletcher was an external recruiter whose contract was terminated. Several white executives, meanwhile, said they felt pushed to hire non-white candidates even without the right experience, or to refrain from ousting underperforming ones. One, Kevin Myersberg, a former managing director in Wealth Management Division, said in his own 2023 lawsuit against the firm about his termination that HR blocked him from laying off some of his lowest performers because they were women or minority employees. The case is now in arbitration. McDade said Myersberg was terminated in a round of layoffs that included employees of every demographic, adding, "We strongly refute the allegations made in his claim." Again, what else is he going to say? He said the bank adheres to federal employment guidelines when it conducts layoffs. Black staffers received emails starting in 2021 welcoming them to an online Black leadership program they had asked to be a part of. The 6-month McKinsey program included discussions on race and presenters teaching strategies such as tackling common mindset challenges for Black leaders. In interviews, some invitees said they wondered why employees of other races weren't included or likened the program to special education for Black employees. Senior Morgan Stanley executives, on the other hand, said they saw McKinsey's offer to put on the program as an opportunity to support up-and-coming Black employees. Employees of all races have recently been invited to participate. And it basically then goes on to say the bank's diversity efforts are an ongoing effort, blah, blah, blah. The bank has been revising references to other underrepresented groups, that some of its diversity efforts were geared toward and broadening their eligibility criteria. Morgan Stanley recently decided it will no longer dole out bonuses to some managers that were based on the number of women and minorities they hired and their performances. And among other changes in how it describes its policies and programs, Morgan Stanley's annual report released last month now says its talent development is based on meritocracy. Oh, how about that? So, and of course, they're stepping up efforts here. And I'm not sure. I don't think there's really that much left. And then, professionals program. Okay. They're trying to fix this stuff. White managers complaints. And I'm trying to see if there's anything else, kind of like, new language, whatever, differently. But I think this was a very interesting article, but this was just you could probably, I would imagine you could do this with thousands of companies across the country, and I think this is actually kind of a mild example. I think that there are some that are far, far worse than this out there. And you could just see from these initiatives that they hurt everybody on every side and every which way. These programs do nothing to bring people together, to build a better culture, to build a better company, a better world. It just doesn't. This stuff just doesn't work. I could get into a lot of the background on DEI and ESG and CRT and all this stuff and where it comes from, but not going to take it that far in this episode, but I wanted to, again, I wanted to cover this because of how much attention is on this particular topic out there right now. And I kind of agree with the overall vibe at the moment, that basically, like, this is a, ESG and DEI is definitely going down. It is absolutely falling out of favor. But, is it dead? No, it is definitely not dead. Like I said, there are acolytes that, espouse this stuff, love this stuff, and more importantly, make their living on this stuff. And because of that, they're not just going to give up and go away and just pack it in. They're going to keep, pushing on this stuff. But I, for one, honestly, I'm just not a fan. I'm just not a fan of this stuff. And I'll just leave it. I'm just going to leave it at that. But with that, I hope people maybe find this topic interesting. What I'm hoping to is maybe stoke a little conversation on this one, maybe see how other people feel about this. Like, if people want me to cover this topic in more detail, I'm happy to do it. Again, I'm a little bit leery on this particular one because of how politically charged it is. I really, I don't know if you can really make anybody really all that happy with this one, whichever way you go. But like I said, with that being said, I will wrap up by saying, if you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that always helps the channel. Remember, we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please be sure to leave your comments down below. And as always, make sure to check out some of the other content on the channel. I hope everyone has a great day out there, and I will see everyone again real soon. Thanks a lot.